Welcome back to Carolina Beat, everyone. I'm over here with Josh London from State Farm, and we're talking all about flood insurance and how do we know we have it, how do we know we need it, and is it important for us to have that, especially in flood zone areas? Welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about flood insurance, shall we?
Yes.
How do we know if we have it, and how do we know if it's the right type of flood insurance for our zone of where we live?
Sure. Everyone, I think one of the common misperceptions is people say, I'm not in a flood zone.
Exactly.
Everyone is in a flood zone. It's just a question of whether you're in a high-risk flood zone or a low-risk flood zone.
Well, let's talk about those high-risk flood zones. Will we? Where are they? And
It can vary, right?
Okay.
So I think a lot of people assume that if you live at the beach, you're automatically in a very high-risk flood zone.
Yes.
Which you probably are. But your neighbor next door in a suburb could be in a high-risk flood zone. It really just depends on what the maps determine, how the rivers flow, the creeks settle, where your levels are.
Yeah. Now, there are obviously different levels of flood insurance, correct?
Sure.
What is there, level 1 to level 4, or can you explain that?
Yeah, so most policies that are backed by the Federal Emergency Management Association or the National Flood Insurance Program, they're going to have limitations to them. So from a residential side, they're going to limit the building coverage to $250,000.
Limit?
Limit.
What happens if your house is worth more?
Then you have to buy excess coverage on the open market.
Oh, wow.
And then they're going to limit your contents to $100,000. But a lot of people find that to be adequate for what they have. It's not necessarily about market value. It's about the building cost itself.
Of rebuilding, you mean?
Correct.
Okay. Now, if we have a mortgage, would our home mortgage people enforce if we're building or have bought a property in a flood zone area? Would they say you have to have flood insurance?
If you're in what's considered to be a high-risk flood zone, your mortgage carrier will require that you carry flood insurance.
What happens if it's out of your budget?
Then you may not be able to buy that house.
Okay.
So unfortunately, I mean, that is one of the things that needs to be factored in when buying a home. Absolutely.
And we want everyone to understand that flood insurance is on top of your other insurance, correct?
Here at the coast especially, I think a lot of people talk about wind and hail or hazard insurance, and they don't necessarily understand the variation. Wind and hail or hurricane insurance is going to cover any wind-related claim. If the wind blows the shingles off your roof and rain gets inside, that's not a flood. That is wind damage or rain damage. Flooding is going to be from rising waters or tidal surge.
See, I would have automatically thought that your normal insurance would be covering flood as well.
Right.
Or your wind insurance or your hurricane insurance, or like it definitely isn't.
No, it's flood insurance.
Separate.
Yeah, there's unfortunately, very few people in the area, unless they're in a high-risk zone, are carrying flood insurance. In the National Flood Insurance Program, in the North Carolina Department of Insurance, are both really this year highly encouraging people to get out there and research taking flood insurance, even if they're in a preferred risk
Very
zone.
quickly, what is that agency again? Department of...
There's North Carolina Department of Insurance,
yes,
and then the National Flood Insurance Program.
And you buy it through them?
No, you come visit an agent like myself or any agent should be able to sell it. But they're really doing a national campaign to try to get more people to take it. Unfortunately, what we see a lot is the areas that are flooding with the weather patterns changing. We're seeing more and more preferred risk properties, low risk flood zones. They're the ones that are flooding. And those folks don't have flood insurance.
What happens? They don't get their house rebuilt.
We hear about it a lot on the news. They're working with FEMA for a grant.
I got you.
Or they're working with the Small Business Administration and borrowing a low interest loan.
Okay.
So they're in a tough predicament, right? They've lost everything in this process. They owe a mortgage, and now they are asking for grant money, which they may or may not get, and it will be very limited what they do get. And the rest of it is going to be borrowed money. Maybe low interest, but now you have a $200,000 mortgage and another $100,000 you borrowed to make the repairs.
It's very stressful. We cannot stress to people enough that you do need to look over your policy.
Sure.
If you don't have all that information there, give Josh a call.